So I watched for the first time this a bit a bit old. It's a bit of an old movie. It's called The Dangerous Lives of Autobots, apparently, although the altering is seen very briefly. So I'm not sure, exactly sure why they call it that. And yeah, it was interesting, especially the fact that they interspersed it with animation. I do generally like such movies better than just live action on its own. I mean, especially if it's about it's concerned comics and such. It's personally I don't have much experience with comics or Marvel or whatever. I've seen the occasional X-Men movie and Batman and Green Lantern, but I don't really follow all the sequels, so which is why, yeah. So I don't know. Um, it wasn't though. I mean, it was its own story, so it's not like I didn't get it or anything, or it made many references. I mean, I'm assuming the most obvious references to the Fantastic Four. I'm assuming, and yeah, I mean, you know, it's a bit annoying to have always thought always sort of I got to admit I didn't quite predict the ending, and I was always curious to see what would happen if they did go along with the ending, but with what they intended to do. But yeah, in hindsight, it's never. Of course, whims and spur of the moment are always dangerous. What did you say about taking diverging paths leading to greatness? Yeah, not so much greatness. This is more like a void. Um, and of course, it's sort of along with the parallel of this animated reality here. There was also the reality parallel as it happens as well, as in real reality as opposed to live action or animated reality on in the movie. That is, yeah, in terms of what's happened to the original writer, which is quite sad. I mean, it wasn't but it's all well, yeah, not external forces as such, more like internal ones, So yeah, it's an interesting parallel as to what happens, uh, and what happens in the movie and such. Uh, the animation I found to be more powerful than the live drama itself for some reason. Of course, animation takes much more leeway, so it just happens. But yeah, it was interesting. Everything that happened was interesting. I mean, it was billed as a comedy. Obviously, the ending wasn't at all comedic. It was just pure drama, obviously, and but everything that happened up to that point was fairly comedic, I suppose. I think the most comedic bit remains, and was and remains. I thought it might be top, but not really, due to reality exerting an influence. I mean, reality within the movie itself, as opposed to real reality. You see, there's a variety of layers to this. Obviously, if the original author didn't die, then I suppose there wouldn't be that external reality as well. It would be just a reality like, the reality actors live in, whereas, on screen something can happen to them, but in real life it doesn't, obviously. But yeah, but yeah, the funniest part, I guess, remains is the bit where they got the statue of the plinth, and I mean that was quite something. That was hilarious, and how it. I mean, obviously, if it did drop on that father's head, it wouldn't be hilarious. It was caution. But how it nearly dropped, made it seem funny, and the fact it didn't drop that, I mean, was a relief for the real life version if it ever happened in real life. So it says it's semi-autobiographical, so I'm wondering how much of it is true and whether this specifically is true. would have been quite something and quite dangerous. Obviously, not as dangerous as what happened at the end, just there, but still. It is still, yeah. It's quite disappointing though that it didn't make any profit whatsoever. It seems. I mean, it's been a while since it's been released, so since then it might have accumulated some sales from DVDs and Blu-rays now, but it's quite disappointing. I mean, there's so much worse. There's always they always can get so much more, you know. Even just pure propaganda can often make profit, and yet things where you get partial animations and such where people actually try to have something interesting, where you have interesting story, these parallels doesn't do. And I'm assuming this is the reason why the director never did anything anymore after this. He did maybe like something else in 2009 it was, but only a couple. So in the decade and uh, the decade after, nothing. So I don't know if interest was lost, but I'm assuming money might have something to do with it. And it's just disappointing. I mean, there's so much. Like, wouldn't it be brilliant if there was like a whole series of this? But no, instead we get nonsense series where the same thing happens constantly. I mean, I wouldn't mind the same thing happening of this, where you get these misadventures and spliced up with animated comic books. It's people just don't seem to like. So these bold endeavors, really. Like, I don't know what's wrong about. I mean, okay, maybe it wasn't wholly, thoroughly funny. You know, it was mostly that one bit with the statue, and then that there were some one-liners that were funny. But it was still interesting drama nonetheless. It was interesting. I thought another small parallel about how that sister there, played by Jodie Foster, said that she's going to finger anyone who took the statue, and then they gave her a finger of the statue, and that's yeah. Uh, that was kind of funny, yeah. Not love funny, but just mildly funny, I suppose. Can't believe there was that one there who seemed to really think that whatever he was doing was a sin. I mean, I don't know how you can think that, yet do whatever it was. Uh, normally you either do not believe it, or I don't know if there's anything in between. Honestly, I'm not sure how. Either you believe it or really. I mean, it wasn't really a commentary on religion, but it sort of parallels that thing and how nuns can be in inverted commas evil as well in comic book fashion style. I doubt there are many nuns that go on motorbikes. To be fair, I also liked how they decided to go for a universal look, as so called, yeah, in terms of where it was filmed, and then how they decided to not go for the local accents. In fact, the first time I noticed where it was set was due to a flag. I don't think they ever said anything else. Of course, it's always due to a flag in that country, especially. But many countries do have flags around of their country, but not many do inside the classroom, I think. Yeah. But other than that, it wasn't quite mentioned, whether local place or state or country. I don't think it was, no. No. So yeah, it was kind of universal, which is better for generally when it concerns animation, it's kind of better, unless of course they're doing something local specifically. I also liked how they began the movie with that mathematical calculation, and that sort of introduces the audience to what kind of danger these people really desire. How really, I mean, that was pretty cool. I thought. I don't think anyone. Well, I'd be surprised if anyone really did that. Very dangerous. I mean, to not get away at the last moment and hope that your calculations are correct. I suppose that's one way to apply mathematical tools and concepts, but I wouldn't personally believe in my mathematical skills to such an extent that my life would be on the line. Even if I was more of an expert, I just what, bro, it's too much of a risk, honestly, and somehow it was cool in a movie fashion, obviously, and it was pretty interesting to begin with as well. I also liked how William Blake had this role in this movie. I mean, besides the reading of a relevant poem there at the end and its usage with a bit of change at the beginning. Um, and yeah, I did notice that it was his before she even attributed it to who did write it. Uh, but yeah, I did actually personally notice how he was sort of the original comic book writer. It's I don't know if there was anyone before him or since, but it means obviously he's quite old in this sense, and the way he drew and wrote obviously was quite unique. So I still need to do quite a bit of digging into that though, but I quite liked what I saw and read so far, and his drawings are kind of mesmerizing. And so it was interesting to have Blake there in this movie as a sort of character behind the scenes, not quite the most prevalent character, but character nonetheless, and one that's called Dangerous by none, presumably due to his atheistic beliefs. I think he was at least, which I think suppose tells you a lot. I mean, he still I think he was because he still did mention God and such. I think so. I'm not sure why he's so dangerous, but I suppose this is just well, honestly, I don't know how people can call others dangerous. But yeah, so yeah, it was interesting how it all parallels. It's almost like the movie was written just for that one moment there where the tiger was read out, because it was quite relevant. Uh, Almost like the poem was written for this movie as well, but obviously it's the other way around. I'm sure Blake didn't at all know hundreds of years ago that this movie was going to be made. I don't even know if the writer of the book of this movie even knew, had any hint at all it was going to be made. It's quite something. He died over a decade before the movie was made. And it was dedicated in his memory. I thought maybe he died that year or something. That's normally what happens. But no, it was like 11 years ago. So quite something. It's quite a lot of years that have passed since that happened. Yeah, but yeah, it was fairly interesting. Kind of like that Bollywood film was interesting. That dealt with the imaginative mind of a child with I think it was it no, not ADHD. It was no, dyslexia. It was wasn't it? Yeah. But the animation there, from what I remember, was more 2D as opposed to this, which is more 2D. So actually, was it? Not sure. I like all kinds of animation movies. I don't mind either way. I don't exclusively go look out for such movies, but um, yeah, it was still interesting as opposed to you know. Honestly, Phil, I don't know what makes some people seem to like and as such go watch the movie presumably in theaters more than others. So for example, with regards to one I watched recently, I can compare to Mallrats. That seems to have been incredibly successful, so way more successful than this was. which is and that one was also re- to do with comics, except they didn't quite animate anything from what I remember. So maybe they should have really because but they didn't anyway. And I personally prefer semi-animated ones. But, this is the thing though. On average on IMDb, it's not rated that much differently. So more or less it's rated 7.1, and this movie about dangerous lives is rated 7. So in terms of that, not much difference. People don't seem to have seen much difference. The sample size still is quite different. So more or less was seen by 100 over 100,000. Yeah, it seems. So the other one was seen by only about 1/10 of the amount. I'm assuming though that's because it is popular and it spawned an entire franchise, huge franchise. But this is what I don't get: how some movies can make so much more in terms of revenue, in terms of So this, so Molvets had a budget of 8 million, and it's made actually not even sure it made its budget. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And yet it still spawned an entire franchise. But no, what I'm forgetting here is that Molvets wasn't the first in the franchise. It was Clark's, which I haven't seen yet. So yeah, Clark's did make profit. It seems it was made really cheaply. Uh, with around quarter of a million and made 3 million in box office. So I suppose that's what enabled it to have a franchise. I suppose the sequel then didn't seem to make a profit, but somehow they still went on with this huge franchise. Quite huge, unbelievably huge. I'm hoping that later on they might have possibly used some animation, considering they're inspired by comics. Of course, comics that doesn't necessarily mean animated, animation. But with this one it did. I'm not sure why they didn't make much profit. I personally wouldn't mind if truly there was a series all about the skeleton character. Just like it sort of promises at the end there, but doesn't really obviously deliver anymore. Just that little bit at the end. Um, but there isn't because probably because didn't make so it's just random chance really, I think, because if Clark's didn't make any profit, if it was the second, not the first. So I mean, if the first in this case was Molret, which of course more or less probably wouldn't have been made on such a huge budget in the first place. So, but even if it had less than that, say it had, it was made on a 4 million budget and made 3 million, there probably wouldn't have been the whole franchise. Because 1 million budget loss is quite a lot. Even if they made 3 million, it's still quite a huge loss. Um, but there wasn't. Yeah. So I mean, there must have been some 2.5 million profit. So they continued on with the franchise. Of course, with regards to this Dangerous Lives movie, it simply didn't make much profit at all, and it was made on a huge budget. I mean, 12 million. I'm assuming most of it went to the animation department. I'm assuming, I don't know. It's still a lot for animation because there was what maybe 5 minute animation, but still expensive. Didn't think it was that expensive, but it's quite a lot. That's the problem that they made. Then I suppose they just blown quite a huge budget on the very first movie, and just didn't make the returns, and so that's it. Just one movie and no more, which is unfortunate because it's interesting as such. It's unfortunately, yeah, that's it. And just one solitary movie. Um, I noticed there was an actor from Donnie Darko. No, it's not quite as interesting as Donnie Darko, but it's still interesting. I mean, still interesting. Yeah.